Hey everyone, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. Today we'll continue talking a little bit more about methylation, but we're still not going to quite get to the answer for the question yet about why do you take certain supplements and not feel good if you possibly have that MTHFR SNP. We need a little more background information first and then we'll get to that. Speaking of information, there are kind of three primary sources that I use to get information regarding this. And about other topics too. When it comes to methylation and genetics, Dr. Ben Lynch is a great resource. He's got the book Dirty Genes that can be very helpful and give you a lot of information. And we'll go through that book a little bit more as we go because we need to talk about some other genes as well because there's that interplay between them and methylation, even if they aren't technically genes involved in methylation. Also, Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, she's got a great resource too, Methylation Diet and Lifestyle, that we'll talk more about next time because there's a lot of similarities in how she sees and kind of dealing with things, and Dr. Ben Lynch. So there's a lot more similarities there than differences. And then Chris Masterjohn's another great source. He's got a lot of different podcasts, different information for a lot of things. Definitely MTHFR and different nutrients just in general. So those are good resources for you guys too. Again, just like with me, take the resources for what they're worth, make sure you vet them out, make sure they're right, because we all can be wrong. For instance, last episode, I said choline being an amino acid, I'm pretty sure. It's not an amino acid, it's a key nutrient that we need. It is found a lot in eggs. So, I'm sorry for kind of speaking there and saying it was an amino acid. But let's move on to today. And so let's talk a bit more about Dr. Ben Lynch. Again, he's got a supplement company, Seeking Health, that has a lot of great supplements. I do like those. He also has a product called Strategene. So if you've already done a DNA test, through 23andMe or some other test, you can run the raw numbers through Strategene and it'll provide you with a report. There's other companies that do these same things. I do like Strategene. I have not used it though, because it gives you the pathways and it kind of gives you more information about what can make it run slower, what can make it run faster, what cofactors are needed, or nutrients and different things. And so I think that helps to kind of piece together a lot of things. What I don't like, actually, I'm not a big fan of genetic testing or running your report through these different things. It's not because there's anything inherently wrong with genetic testing or even running it through those tests. There's just issues. So the issue, if you do the genetic test, is that yes, you may see you have this SNP, but the question then is, does that even matter? Because you might be born with the SNP. So in using Dr. Lynch's terms, you're born with a dirty gene. But if you've got all the diet, lifestyle, epigenetic factors under control, that gene's not being expressed. So even though it was quote unquote born dirty, it's acting clean, to use that analogy. So that doesn't necessarily tell us anything. Same thing, you may see with a genetic report that you don't have that SNP, and so the gene was born clean, but because you don't have the lifestyle, diet, and epigenetic factors under control, it's now acting dirty. So, again, it's not that I don't like the test, it's that I don't think the information it tells you, if you have that SNP or not, necessarily tells you anything useful. There's still other information you need to go along with it. My problem with a lot of the different products out there that you get from different either genetic testing companies or some of the supplement companies and things, or even sometimes on organic acids test, it gives you the results, and then based on those results, you need all these supplements. That sounds wonderful. It seems like it's going to simplify that process a lot. However, a lot of times, okay, you need this supplement for X condition, but taking that supplement will actually make Y condition worse, and you have it. So just running through like, oh, I have this condition, I need all these supplements, this condition needs these. It doesn't look at everything and how they all relate with each other. So again, that's why I think if you are going to do this, the Strategene is probably going to be a better option for you and kind of piecing everything together and seeing how it all goes, rather than just a kind of cookie cutter here, take these because you have this. So basically, I guess, my thoughts on it, and actually Dr. Lynch's thoughts too, are you don't have to do the genetic testing. And so, maybe you shouldn't do it. Who knows? That's each person to figure out on their own. So again, with MTHFR, you can get these different SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphism, so it's a change in the base, so the DNA base at certain positions. Now, you can have other SNPs than what's listed here. These are the most common SNPs. So 67TT is a very common one, and then 1298CC is another common one. Again, a SNP can occur anywhere in that change. That number is just kind of telling you where in that chain. So, I mean, we've got these very long chains. It's not like there's only like 2 or 3 base pairs going on. So there can be tons of different changes occur. We don't know all of them. We don't know what impact all of them would have either. So when we have a SNP, well, I guess let's back up. When we get a gene, we get 1 copy from our mom, we get 1 copy from our dad. So if you get the same copy from each of them, then you're going to be homozygous. If you get one that's 1 copy and one that's a different copy, you're heterozygous. So the same with these, we could have a 67TT heterozygous or homozygous variant. If you have that homozygous, meaning you get 2 dirty copies, again, we'll use Dr. Ben Lynch's terms, that could decrease that MTHFR function by 70 to 75%, so that enzyme function. If you're heterozygous, meaning you got 1 clean copy, 1 bad copy, then that could decrease it like 33, 35%. If you have that 1298CC, again, homozygous, so 2 dirty copies, it can decrease things around like 40%, 39 or so. And then if you got a heterozygous, so 1 clean, 1 dirty, it's around 17%. Now you can have a compound heterozygous. What that means is that at one of those spots, you've got 1 clean, 1 dirty. At the other spot, you've got 1 clean, 1 dirty. I see different numbers on this, so I think it depends on which source you get. And so with the other decreased efficiencies that I quoted, you can probably find some different numbers that'll change that just based on where you're looking. Hold on, Stormy's playing with the wires. All right, sorry about that, but I figured instead of having the camera swaying, she's definitely full of kitten energy, so that can be hectic at times. So anyway, if you've got that compound heterozygous, basically it looks like that function could get you similar to that homozygous 67TT. So it can have a pretty significant impact. Again, it can. Just because you have these does not mean that's actually what it's doing. So again, if you quote unquote have MTHFR, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got this 0.75% reduction in activity of that enzyme. And again, we shouldn't say I have MTHFR because we all have MTHFR. What we're trying to say is, do we have one of those SNPs or not? So again, just trying to be critical and clarifying with words. So again, different sources, you can probably find some different percentages on those, but it should be at least pretty close to that. And again, let's look at a list of the methylation genes. This is not a complete list. There's too many probably to count and name, and I'm not even sure we know all the ones that are involved in methylation, but some of the different ones: AHCY, BHMT, CVS, COMT, MAOA, MAOB, MAT1A, MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, and then you've got different D and MT, so the DNA methylation. So there's a whole lot of things going on there. And then there's going to be all this interaction with them, and then there's interaction with other genes that aren't even involved in methylation too. That's why while you may have this SNP, it may still be acting clean, even though it was quote unquote born dirty. Now, for a lot of people, if they do have that MTHFR SNP, folic acid does not tend to be a good supplement for them to use. They do need the folate. Part of that is the body has to go through a couple different steps to get that folic acid into something usable, and that may be something that they don't do as well. They have that MTHFR SNP. However, there's going to be some research that kind of seems to go against that. Dr. Ruscio did a little video with saying MTHFR doesn't matter, and there was a test or a study. I didn't look up the study to see everything, but it was using folic acid and stroke risk. And even people with MTHFR who took folic acid had a 30% reduction in stroke, according to the study. Now, again, that's the relative risk factor. I don't know what the absolute risk factor. So how many people were having strokes? You know, out of 100, was it 60 of them, and then you decrease it by almost a third? Well, then that's significant. But if it was you had 3 people have a stroke and then you just had 2 that took folic acid, so again you decreased it by about a third, and that's not quite as convincing. But that at least shows there may be some times where that's not a problem. Again, if that enzyme's functioning well, then folic acid probably won't be as much of an issue. If the MTHFR enzyme is not functioning well, then folic acid is probably going to be more of an issue. So again, I think it's going to be it depends, just like everything else. But if you go on like PubMed and you search methylation in different disease states, you'll find all kinds of papers. There's a lot of different papers too that have looked at folate supplementation along with different diseases and treatment, and you just find mixed results. Because again, sometimes people do well with the supplements, sometimes people have reactions to the supplements. However, what we do tend to know is if you can get the folate through diet, that tends to lead to the best outcomes. So this kind of makes the case that maybe we don't need to supplement with folate if we can get it through diet. And so that should be kind of the first priority or first choice, is trying to get these nutrients through diet. Then if we absolutely can't do that, maybe the supplement becomes necessary. And that's one thing that Dr. Ben Lynch says too. So I do respect him. Again, he's got something that could make money off of different genetic testing, but he's saying it's not necessary. And then with the supplements, like in his book, it's not a book just to kind of keep selling his supplements. The first part is get rid of supplements, do these different lifestyle things first. And we'll talk more about that next week. So again, someone who would probably make more money if he kept pushing, do genetic testing and then also do strategy and buy all these supplements because you have this issue. He's not doing that because, again, the lifestyle stuff, the epigenetic things matter more. And so diet, lifestyle, stress management, all those things. So I do respect that. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the epigenetic changes or how those make a difference. So with inflammation, that can have a negative impact on methylation. You can get epigenetic related changes in DNA methylation, so that can then lead to different issues too. Again, it depends on what area is being affected and on what kind of outcome you're going to see. And then if you're having inflammation, some of the resources you would need for methylation, they're going to be soaked up and used in other pathways to try to bring down that methylation. It's kind of a similar thing with oxidative stress. If we have increased oxidative stress, we got an increased need for glutathione. And so the oxidative stress and the free radicals, that can damage DNA, and then that can also impair the methylation enzyme. So again, we're not seeing that same thing. And again, that pathway is probably going to go down towards being used to produce more glutathione rather than homocysteine being remethylated into methionine. One other interesting thing, that a lot of the methylation that's being done in our body is actually to produce creatine. So that's something to keep in mind with things too. And we'll probably talk more about that next week. So we just talked a little bit about inflammation and oxidative stress. Let's tie this back into a previous podcast we did. So again, cell danger response. I think it comes down to like mitochondria for our health. If our mitochondria are healthy, then we're going to be healthy. If there's an issue there, then it's going to have an impact on us. So again, the mitochondria are used to produce energy for the cell, but they have other roles as well. They can kind of play a role in the immune system. And so when there is an issue there, they will change their state. So the mitochondria go from this nice state, anti-inflammatory, energy producing state, to one that could be pro-inflammatory to help fight off something. But then that means they're not producing the same amount of energy, and the cell needs energy to run all these different chemical reactions and run the pathway for methylation and run the pathway to produce glutathione, run the pathway to produce ATP. And some of these chemical reactions require ATP just to run them. So if we have mitochondria that are not in their optimal state, then that can lead to different issues. And again, depending on where the mitochondria are located, can determine what effects we see. So again, if the mitochondria are located more in our brain, we're going to see more neurological effects. If they're located elsewhere, we'll see those types of effects. And so again, we can see how all these things tie along or tie together, and everything kind of has an impact on other things. That's why drilling down and just looking at one thing and saying, okay, I have this MTHFR SNP, so I have to do all these things. That doesn't always work, because maybe you're right, but you very well could be wrong based on all these other things, how the other genes interact, how the mitochondria are reacting. So we got to keep those things in mind. And that's why we do want to, kind of drill in, auger in sometimes, but we also need to be able to pull out and see the big picture and how it all goes together too. So that's it for today. Hopefully this wasn't too long. Next week, we'll talk more about kind of diet, lifestyle, a little bit with the supplements too, and how it relates to this. So we'll finally answer the question next week. We'll probably keep this going for a few more weeks, because again, there's a lot of tie-in with the other genes. And so that's where some of the other information from Dr. Lynch's book and other sources will kind of come into play. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I appreciate you so much. Please like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will see you next week. Bye.